It's an honor and a pleasure to have these two beloved teachers and deeply respected poets, Sarah Maclay and Gail Wronsky, with us today. Sarah will read first and then Gail. Sarah Maclay is the author of Mask for the Black Room 2011, The White Bride 2008, and Horror 2004, all from University of Tampa Press, as well as 3 chapbooks. A recipient of a 2015 residency at Yadoo, she has received a Pushcart Special Mention and the Tampa Review Prize for Poetry, among other awards and fellowships. Her poems and criticism have appeared in the American Poetry Review, Field Plowshares, The Best American Erotic Poetry from 1800 to the Present, and International Poetry International, where she served as book review editor for a decade. She teaches creative writing and literature at Loyola Marymount University. In Leaves, Sarah Maclay writes, flattening a foreground/background/memory imagination. She ends the poem, quote, winter of fact as usual, behind the fall, and what comes after that night is not morning, end of quote. She uses words like Helen Frankenthaler paints, words as subject matter, creating her universe right there on the page with its many physical and memory/psyche layers. In 26, Sarah wrote, what was true, it was up to her to invent her own music as she began to hear it in the growing stain of sky, end of quote. By painting with words, with the senses nature adheres to, she has created her own music. She wakes us up to see in a new way. The movements, the illusion, and physical reality are weaved by Sarah with such a fine hand, eye, and ear, it creates an enticing and earthly sensuousness. Sarah has a searing intellect and a deep passion that inform her vision. In her 32, she wrote, the sound of birds infiltrated me. Her sounds, rhythms have infiltrated us, made us more aware of existence. Here's a luminous poet, Sarah Maclay.
Thank you, Harry. That was one of those ones now I have to live up to. And I wanted to mention I'm going to be reading one of those poems that you quoted from today, which is also from the most recent book, the She series, A Venice Correspondence, from What Books Press, which Gail is one of the primary movers and shakers of. And so a lot of the other bio info actually came from the What Books Press site. So that preceded the She series. But I'll talk a little bit about that one in a second. I'm going to read 6 poems, and I'm kind of dotting them around between the White Bride, the She series, and then some newer stuff that I'll talk about a little bit. But one of the things that I was thinking about before organizing, during the time I was organizing this today, is one thing I know we all have in common, and by that I mean you guys, you poets, and everybody else actually who I think is there, is that we've all devoted so much of our lives to making art in one form or another, and often in more than one role. And so a lot of the poems that I'm going to be reading are informed in their process, in their making, by other art forms or stories or music kind of colliding with what I was already doing. And I wanted to start by reading Let Every Heart. You might recognize that phrase from A Christmas Carol. I was thinking about it because it was a point where I was trying to make a lot of room. And as I was writing this poem, I happened to come across this article about how Chet Baker would try, when he was playing the trumpet, to have at least the illusion of music that kept going, as though the breath never stopped. And I just love this idea. So I thought, how would I do that in a poem? And there's no way that I'll physically be able to do it without running out of breath. But that was kind of the intention here. Let every heart. The blue sash of wind circling the tiny waist of the city, ample and ample, the satin, the keen swishing of leaves, the burnished browns of dislodged palm piled askew on the walks, the sailing trash, the cry, the lover's tongue, slowly making its way. The heaving boughs, the undersides of silver, all at once turning together like birds, the huge relief, the sigh, the way the hair falls to the side, the fingers turning the scalp to sand, the smell of dope rising up from the sidewalk, a musk eucalyptus, the sirens, the horns, the bits of yellow leaves like a stack of centenes blown over the street, the unrelenting sky, these ornaments of time, the letting go of the spine, the held flight of the 1,000 bougainvillea blossoms of paper, fuchsia, and rust, the return, the moment of stillness, the climbing chords, the lights suddenly off, the parking lot words of the bantering man in the Chrysler, the lips as expressive as fingers, the palm debris everywhere like fallen wood, him, it, the pelvis open like a hinge, the sound exhaled from both bodies, the sigh beyond color, the steep, the raw pitch of legato, the face entirely changed, the face made true, the wind as it spindles the long limp lines like a sea of bamboo. Oh, let me not cease. Oh, let this not cease. The erupting quiet, the wind, the sneer, the sound of the drum being brushed by sashes, the blue and terrible sashes, the lush, unspoken scream welling up from the center, lavish, unbearable, this moment, this. Thank you. Harry was quoting from the end of the next poem that I'm going to read, which is part of the She series. And I was working on this with my friend Holiday Mason back and forth. I was living in back of her in a hut. And so, we both have computers and stuff, but we were actually trading poems by putting them in envelopes and squeezing them between the doors and the cracks below the window in our places. And the idea was that we were each going to write 50 poems that were in some kind of correspondence. A lot of it was really closely linked. And there would be these parts where we just kind of spiraled out because we were writing at different paces. But this is one that came after a poem of hers in which, maybe by accident, both Odysseus and Ophelia ended up in the poem. And I thought, I have to run with this because the mashup is too good. So this is as after Odysseus, her body wanted to be Ophelia. The pistol came with its own music. An echo slid from her throat. Liquid, alive, beyond common names for color. How at night she could not swim. Her song like a line of neon in wavering slices across the crinoline dark, until the dogs began to bay and men slipped into the skins of animals to roll against the mud without the barrier of clothes. How that bay was a living jewel, the sound, the topaz water. The water had poured from her and become alive. She would wash up on the shore or float, as white as the lizard who pulls the carriage in a dream, all soggy finery and hair and reeds. Over and over, her body was painted in darkness like a wine of skin. What was true? It was up to her to invent her own music as she began to hear it in the growing stain of sky. I'm going to read some new poems that are not collected yet. And they're from two different groups. And I want to start with a poem where I'm pretty sure a lot of you are going to recognize some of the references I'm making in here. And it's also in the form of a letter. Letter almost sent. You won't like this. Maybe you won't want it. I'm lying here in the dark with my burning candle. Otherwise, it's still. I tried again not to think of you today. It was so cold, even though it's still September, that I had to wear 2 coats. It wasn't quite enough. By nightfall, it was brisk. Leaves already golden, fallen, wet. We walked quickly, my friend and I, from the parking lot to the symphony. I made it nearly to the end of the Rimsky-Korsakov, all the way to that crescendo and quickening, that cymbal crash, and then in the place where things go suddenly quiet, but alive, into that barely audible, sustained, pianissimo pulsing, lingering, exactly like it always is when we're together after, holding each other, exactly like this, but in sound. You must listen. How could it have been composed without this private knowledge, this experience? It was shocking to understand this. I can smell your skin. They say he used to compose while walking along the footbridges between the bulrushes and bending willows, the gardens and the lake. The Germans leveled the summer house where he wrote it. I so hope you're okay. Don't worry. I know nothing can happen, though this feels so strange. Can't not think of you at night in the ice palace of Veracino. So cliche, I know. Crystalline, deserted, filled with snow. Even though we know it wasn't constructed on the steppe, but in a studio lot near Madrid, not far from the airport. The ice made out of cellophane and paraffin. The snow a mix of aspirin powder and snow and soap flakes. Just as hard to walk through as real snow, not ours to enter. And anyway, it doesn't exist. Forgive me. I so hope that things are somehow better. P.S. My brother and I spent several hours trimming the apple trees in the yard as sunset flecked its pink and orange against gray. We caught it just in time. And then this one is from a chapbook that I've been working on and off for more than a decade. And it started when I was actually teaching HD at LMU. And she was someone whose work I'd loved in college, this modernist poet. A lot of whose work is very, very minimal and distilled, but sometimes not. Sometimes she really branches out, as she did in Trilogy. And this, almost all of the names for the poems, the titles for poems in this chapbook come from phrases in one poem in the center of Trilogy. and a lot of them start with Our Lady of this, Our Lady of that. There's a lot of that in the poem. So I had to invent a few new Our Ladies of, and this one is called Our Lady of Wrong Lyrics. He demands the landlord, pugnacious, with strangely cut hair, as though cut in clumps and darkened, that she write the lyrics for his musical, in which some biblical backstory message is braided with urban violence, or be killed by him. To demonstrate, he kills his wife, who has also refused, in the next room, allowing her to listen. She imagines chunks of melons thunking, rolling pins, or bats. The project holds no interest. She asks about credit, which she would normally receive, and he says that the lyrics must be ghostwritten, that the music will come second. To her surprise, this comes as a great relief. The project holds no interest, in particular because it gives her freedom to write badly, to destroy his project, to write in a mediocre voice, anonymously, with the conviction that he cannot tell the difference. Nonetheless, she begins to conceive of ways in which to leave the apartment piece by piece at lunchtime, say, or times when he's not there, carrying her belongings one by one until the room she lives in is bare and she can simply disappear for good. I'm going to end with two more poems that are moving into this longer collection I've been working on for a few years. And the first one I want to read is, it's a poem that began as I was looking around LA in 2015, 2016, and having this feeling that LA was like a collaboration between David Hockney and Hieronymus Bosch. And I didn't understand what I was seeing yet. And then what I realized was that a lot of it had to do with the growing population of people who don't have homes or who are making do with homes that are not adequate, which of course now has grown, exponentially. But there was this strange thing at that time where it was still possible at times to walk by, to not want to look. And I wanted to, at one point, write this with my finger on a piece of concrete so that people would have to get really close to see it. And when I had that idea, there was no way not to think of those other tablets. So that's what happened. The name of the poem is Real Estate, as opposed to Real Estate. It's what happens when you remove one letter. Real Estate. Thou shalt hang thy blankets from a tree, or thou shalt score a gig as a retail doorman on Rodeo. Thou shalt cover thyself with a sheet of clear plastic and kick at the corner of Broadway and 6th while pedestrians pass. Thou shalt fumble for keys at the end of the night shift, still in scrubs. Thou shalt hang a right in thy pre-owned 911 Carrera. Thou shalt remove all personal belongings from thy cubicle before the end of the business day. Here's a box. Thou shalt spring for the $27,000 beaded gown not far from the Bois d'Argent. Thou shalt prop the mattress against the eucalyptus across the street from the house in escrow, the 2-story for lease, and the Renault covered in Tyvek. Thou shalt park thine SLK 320 under the sycamore leaves. Thou shalt not be able to light your cigarette in the wind as you sit on the stoop behind the open storefront display of wighead mannequins. It's an economy storage box. Thou shalt pick up the tab on the ornamental $13,000 Buddha and that 6K bottle of scotch in the duty-free. Thou shalt dry thy clothes on the guardrail in front of the Walgreens and Shabu Shabu. Thou shalt walk with weights in the evening as the sky turns amethyst then amber and the water comes on inches from the rusty grass. Drive 45 on the boulevard. Thou shalt leave the couch and the plastic plant on the curb at the end of the month. Thou shalt load the reload cube for a pickup at Glendon and Vienna. Thou shalt live in the back of a 1950s Buick with shattered glass. You can use the Wi-Fi at the Starbucks next to the Dollar Loan. Thou might get a construction job on the northern side of the National Rent Fence. Thou shalt put the tents up after the shoppers leave. Thou shalt no longer be able to afford the unpermitted room within earshot of gunshot and helicopter. Thou shalt join the 17 million readers who have fallen. Thou shalt try to sleep in the late afternoon at the base of a street lamp on the hidden side of a shell in the marina. Thou shalt lose thy shirt-selling armor, rugs, and chandeliers. No parking anytime. Thou shalt stick 2 signs in the lawn, house for lease and tutoring. Thou shalt check the stats on the listings from the last 6 days. Thou shalt organize thy belongings carefully under the overpass. Thou shalt not vacate the premises without giving a 30-day notice. Thou shalt guard the tents at Venice and Glow. Open door policy. Thou shalt not sleep except upon a concrete floor. I want to end with a poem where I'm writing from art. This is based on a painting by the surrealist Remedios Varo. And it's trying to inhabit a painting of hers called Les Feuilles Mortes, the dead leaves. So this is a mirror of leaves. Even now, I draw you toward me, even as the black mold furs the ceiling, Spanish moss hanging abruptly from the walls, draping across the furniture, that rococo fauteuil and my settee. In dry, organic antimacassars and ratty doily strands, while the edges of the Augustin carpet still beneath us are sipped by silverfish and rug beetles and moths, and the curtains blow into the room along with the graying leaves of autumn, already dead, already light as termites, thin as ash. And still your chest is an open door, and birds fly out of the vaulted ceiling of your cathedral heart. Like red origami and tiny white, they fly into the wild air of the room as you tiptoe toward me in your gray mime, like a shadow, as alive as trees. While I gently pull on the long green strand of yarn as it gathers into a ball I can hold in my hand, and some would say I cry red tears, or that my entire chest is as red as my waist-length uncut hair, and that it seems I can only stare straight ahead as I weep and pull your open heart toward mine, even as this island of wool below us diminishes as I perch my stool upon it, oblivious to the ragged, shrinking edges, as the invisible choir of insects erodes the original design. And some would say, so focused am I on the wool in my hand that I don't even notice the growing devastation of the room. But I must tell you, and you can see this for yourself if you look closely, that the lines descending from my eyes are not tears, no, or even blood, not now, but merely the last of the remaining gold leaf etched into these walls in the 18th century in another climate, barely visible now, a blanched, infested background. And others do not recognize or know, I guess, the way the skin can rouge in pleasure, but mine always does. And though I know I'm facing the other direction and shouldn't be able to see this, if you look yourself, you'll find that the mirror above the fireplace clearly reflects the gathering clouds that have entered the room in a gusty rush of nimbus, further darkening the chalky charcoal look of the crown moldings, and below the mantel where the fire should be, or at least a screen, a massive nest of webs. Yet even as everything around us grows gradually colorless and intermittently devoured, I can feel you coming toward me, though I can't yet see the exact features of your face. Your step is light, your balance as precise and honed as a wooden marionette, freed of all strings, yet miraculously choosing to keep in your heart this one bit of yarn as I hold and roll the other end in my hands, and your calves and thighs are strong, radiant almost, as you inch closer and then very near. And as I hand you finally this small green ball, this homespun ball of my waiting, a bird will fly out of your chest into mine, and the joined cathedral of our twinned hearts will be our sanctuary. Sanctuary enough, vast enough, unending. And as this infusion of color you've given me, as I have welcomed you again and again to my chamber just to feel your presence near, even though the room itself grows nearly tarnished, leached of hue, drawn down to a bleached out play of values and some drafty chiaroscuro, while the weather and bugs feel the paint and even silently lick the stains from the corners of the wood and burrow through the cornices. As this color you've managed to preserve in me, at some sacrifice to yours, I'd say, seeps back now also into you, and my gaze shifts from the task of attending to this yarn to the proper study of your features. Because, finally, home is simply an article of faith, an article of mirroring. As your features become clearer, light unbends the chambers and the hallways of the cathedral in which it's as though we've really always lived, and even now can't fathom. And even in this moment of a room's final unraveling, this one's no illusion, as it opens into the new unfolding architecture of our future, solid and unfinalified, unformed.
That was wonderful. That was transcendent. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
A bird and your poem flew out of your poems into our heart and mind and spirit, and it was transfixing. So thank you very much for that. Our next poet is Gail Wronsky. Gail Wronsky is the author, co-author, or translator of 14 books of poetry and prose, among them Dying for Beauty, a finalist for the Western Arts Federation Poetry Prize, Poems for Infidels, Blue Shadow Behind Everything Dazzling, and Imperfect Pastorals. Her translation of Alicia Partnoy's book, Fuegos Florales, Flowering Fires, recently won the American Book Prize from Settlement House Press. Her poems have appeared in Poetry, Boston Review, among other journals. She teaches creative writing and women's literature at Loyola Marymount University in LA, and is currently working on an art/poetry project with the Los Angeles artist Gronk. Reading Gail Wronsky's poetry has been a challenge and a delight. With her exceptional use of language, her inventive juxtapositions, her leaps and unexpected turns. She astonishes the reader like an acrobat, or even higher, like a trapeze artist, as the saying goes, who flies through the air with the greatest of ease. In Gail's poem, Let Thought Become Your Beautiful Lover, she writes, not hearing the words of the poet saying love is an ornate piano, love is a seismic plate, love is never anything a poet says it is. It will be as enchanting as a wandering Orphic singer in a little boat surrounded by attentive birds. I think Plato would have liked that phrase. Where does she live in her poems? She wrote in her poem, drawn by a team of three-legged, fish-tailed horses, quote, I live in a kind of lurching and jerking amid shimmers, glimpses, and recognitions between the day and its passing, end of quote. She does these acrobatic moves and ends, the beautiful sea. What could be more unbreakable? In the poem, Wild Beasts and Fish, Cattle and Colored Birds, Gail links symmetry and form and fear, linking desire to spectator and voyeur, choosing neither. Her poem ends, I could enumerate the forest of the night, burning more or less unremittingly. Talk about nerve, nature, and desire. There's no fear of heights in Gail Wronsky. Gail's poems are fun, mysterious, surreal, wild, containing awe and thrills. Here's a wondrous poet, Gail Wronsky.
Thank you so much, Harry. That's a beautiful introduction. And wow, I'm still in Sarah Maclay world. That's such a wonderful place to be. It's going to take me a minute to transition, but thank you for that introduction. That was just stunning, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to read some poems first from my chapbook, Blue Shadow Behind Everything Dazzling, which is a collection of poems I wrote in India. My husband and I were teaching study abroad in the Himalayas for about half a year, and it just blew me away. I mean, everybody who spends any time in India says that it changes your life. And so I'm feeling like we're all living in a very different time right now. And it reminds me of other sort of different times of isolation and maybe spirituality and questing. You know, I think we're all doing a lot of interior stuff right now, working on our interiors because the exterior world has become so limited to us. Anyway, this one is called A Portal on the Forehead. It's so simple on a holy day to see with the third eye, to recognize the cliffs and rivers and white-winged horses of the vaster world. Still, there are splinters in the brain that vibrate with a fierce nostalgia for the cloaked at life of blurred and disjointed vision that ache with love for the rough opacity of things. One wraps around the other, so that on a rainy day in Sarnath, a neem tree might bleed pure mercury out of its leaves and flood us with insight, almost as if we recognized that particular dance of alacrity and silver as something we once did and will do again tomorrow, somewhere deep within the cicatrix, the hoof wound, the yogi's thumbprint, the marigold's aperture. Here's a poem called Beneath the Ganges Where It Is Dark. And the reason I wrote this is because in India, there are holidays all the time and festivals all the time. And because there are so many gods and all the gods have their own festivals. And this is sometime in the fall, there's a festival for the goddess Durga, who is a goddess, an earth goddess. And Artisans take mud from the bottom of the Ganges River and make statues of Durga. And then when the festival is over, they take those statues back and put them back in the Ganges. So this is a poem from Durga's point of view once she's back in the Ganges. Beneath the Ganges, where it is dark, there is no edge of petal, no tin edge of star. Without edges, there is no vividness. This is what I enjoy most about being here. Edges pretend that one thing ends, but nothing does end, not here, beneath the Ganges, where it is dark. Go on, sure, why not? And this starts with an epigram from a book of Hinduism. It says, the gods walked along the path up the valley like a caravan of ants. My beloved black bamboo seems wrong today here next to the live oak on my terrace. Though as I say that, I know it's what I've said every time I've arrived at this precise moment. Before I pause, then notice a tribe of red ants stuck like dried blood bits in thin cracks in the oak bark. To go on at that point always seems an inadequate description of what it is we do when Brahma wakes. Even living fails to describe this inhabiting of eternity in which we pause occasionally and insist upon staking claim to an aesthetic point of view. One wants to be singled out. At the same time, one wants to be hidden in a thicket of sharp black leaves, to be nothing but a pair of orange eyes without the human burden of self-awareness. Pure fear, pure hunger, pure procreant urge, pure thoughtless push. When Hamlet says, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth, he's thinking too of the grave where there is no thinking blood, no bloody thinking. Let's see. Let me read a poem about Mount Kanchenjunga. This is the last poem I'll read from this book. And Mount Kanchenjunga is the third highest peak in the Himalayas. And it's where I lived in the Himalayas, looked right out. I had a balcony that looked right out at Mount Kanchenjunga, where we will sit and talk of time and change as the world ebbs and flows, ourselves unchanged. The ice-white face of the Buddha rises radiantly over the rice paddies of Sikkim, over black cardamom leaves, huge ferns and teak forests. I see it briefly every dawn before it's hidden in clouds or by rainfall. This god is not by any means, I think, Prometheus, dragged to his altars soiled and garlandless, nor pinnacled dim in any kind of intense inane. This one flies Bengal tigers to far-off rock ledges or weeps a sacred lake into being. I love catching sight of his face from my balcony before lion-breathing myself into a meditative reverie, out of which sometimes what I love even better is the sight of his cloud-masked obscurity. Every lover loves an absence, I whisper to him, knowing well that his reliably returning presence is essential to the pleasure of my nostalgia when he disappears. One day, climbing to a famous monastery in Bhutan, something puts the mischief in me, and I say to my guide, Pema, a Tibetan, you really believe that the Buddha flew a tiger to this mountaintop? Rather than telling me my Western mind couldn't possibly comprehend it, which is what he normally said, he says, I thought you were a poet. More than a year later, I answer you, Pema, I am. here on the other side of the earth, in the land where Hercules is busy murdering the vultures that imprison me, here at the furthest borders of the world where the bright world sometimes lets itself be seen. All right. I'm going to break it up with one rather silly poem now. This is from a book called Bling and Fringe, which is a collection of experimental poems I wrote with my friend Molly Bendal. She wrote the fringe poems, which look like fringe on the page, and I wrote the bling poems, which look like sequins blinging across the page, or so we thought. This is a kind of a spoof on wine language. Rain, wine, soul music. Very forward in the mouth, if not married with caribou steak. But it ought to age well. It has certain plum nuances, a Burgundian Vin du Pays for the realm. Take the incomparable Aaron Neville from the humidor, some fin de siècle absinthe, whatever honors us, our bodies, our shelves, the emotions. You just have to decide. I'm a pussycat doll, avec Veuve Clicquot, all those ska bands from the 1970s, Lady Marmalade. I'm dying to evolve. You're refined and debutante-like. I'm so sober now, I can sing anyone under the page or under the table. Don't stop in the name of love. Go for the big creamy finish. Okay. Let's see, I'm going to read a couple poems from Imperfect Pastorals. And these poems were all inspired by Virgil's eclogues, which are his sort of nature poems and his poems about farming. And of course, I know nothing about farming, but I learned. And the titles of these poems are all lines, like Sarah's doing with HD, lines from Virgil poems. This one is called The Heron Leaves Her Haunts in the Marsh. And I live in Topanga Canyon, which is not too far from where you guys are. And even before the quarantine, it was hard to leave my house because it's just a cozy little cabin up here in the mountains, and it's just hard to leave sometimes. So the heron leaves her haunts in the marsh. Let me go, domestic air, conflict, and anarchism. Let me replace the thick veil of separation with a thinner veil. The anchoring point of a marriage is mythical. Catch me off guard and slip out for some whiskey, why don't you? I'm not the one in the leather coat and the comb-over makeover. Over me, the wind's dumb moan. Beside me, the foam and glitter of the Pacific. The heron has, quote, one of the most begrudging avian takeoffs. Oh, fucking hell, I'll go. Have I had a tetanus shot? Not for years. Okay, I hope that F-bomb wasn't too much. You can bleep that out, Harry. And I'll read Drawn by a Team of Three-Legged Fish-Tailed Horses, which Harry mentioned. And this is a poem about the god Neptune. I guess I'm feeling closer to the gods these days. The road to death is crooked even for a god. Your three-legged fish-tailed horses never want to pull in the same direction, so the chariot lurches and jerks forward in a confused motion, driving the charioteer to curse, to use the whip, sometimes to crash against crusty underwater cliffs or plummet into sudden drop-offs on the seafloor. How much more difficult for poor humans caught between the names of things and the iridescences of perceptions. 1 minute, walking alone and in love on a mountain path. The next, waking up on a clinic's cot, face to face with different pastures. Out of this moment, something suddenly expressing itself in a poem, and out of that moment, another plummeting. Meanwhile, herds of shapeless, enormous seals hover in the sea above hidden flower beds. I live in a kind of lurching and jerking amid shimmers, glimpses, and recognitions between the day and its passing. Last night, I stood beneath a coral tree whose black branches were full of snowy egrets squawking and shifting before settling down for sleep. It was a picture for a Roman tapestry, almost an image for a poem. And then I felt another plummeting. It had something to do with beauty, something to do with the dogged willfulness of specificity and its opposite, all the alienated, non-committal wavering of the sea, the beautiful sea. What could be more unbreakable? And one more from here, another one that Harry mentioned. Let thought become your beautiful lover. For then thought will be as noiseless as a mellowing pear, or it will lope out like a wind-wild, unbridled horse, or pause with you on your balcony, taking in the sea smell, not hearing the words of the poet saying, love is an ornate piano. Love is a seismic pulse. Love is never anything a poet says it is. It will be as enchanting as a wandering Orphic singer in her little boat surrounded by attentive birds. Indeed, were I not now furling my sails and hastening to turn my prow toward land, I might hold forth further on the topic, and you might think me beautiful. Okay, and I'm going to read some new poems. This one is called Heroism, and it's always great when these things happen in readings, but, you know, Sarah mentioned Odysseus and has that great poem about Odysseus and Ophelia, and I have Odysseus in this poem, so yay. A little continuity. Heroism. Remember how Odysseus put the flaming log in the Cyclops' eyes, twisted it around in there, and that feeling after sleep, your cave-like scare, the burning sidewalks, the burning street, dreams of it all coming in, rising in your room, the ghost of a 19th century person. At first just wispy, then starkly black and white, a suit, a vest, a monocle, someone's uncle, some distant relative. Was it you who stood on the chair and said, be gone, be gone? Or was it the usual hiding under the blanket? Was it you who fished the drunken poet from the swimming pool? Down, 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 then dried up in the bones of him. Okay. This one is called Embrace Your Flaws, Then Time Will Recognize Your Living. I use too many abstract words in poems and don't curse enough. Those are flaws by which I might be recognized in time. My partner is a romantic, by which I mean he would rather meditate in English cemeteries than go to the bowling alley. Time knows this about him as it wraps soft manacles on his ankles and wrists, metonymic manacles of illness and constant obnoxious pain. I want to stop relying on sorrow, to watch the gray waves crest and plummet without seeing death in the plastic straws dropped about like clues in a murder mystery on the sand. The murder of the earth, I suppose. But there I go again with sorrow, with time. Flaws, they snag us. They remind us that our wrists and ankles were at one point feathered or furred, that we were at one time oblivious to time. Not that this means much to you, skeptical listener. You're watching birds on a wire, how they fly off one by one. Or you're watching children splashing on the shore and thinking, you don't know what youth is, you little motherfuckers. See? You're just as flawed as I am, but in your own distinctive way. Time will be able to find both of us when the time comes. It'll rip us a new one. It'll render us all anti-intellectual, even me. Okay, and I've got another one here. This is for my daughter, who is now not my daughter anymore. She's a non-binary person. So she goes by they, which is really hard for a mother to do, you know? I mean, she's been my daughter for 30 years, and now all of a sudden she's my child. So I'm working with it, you know? A non-binary person walked by, for Marlena Dali. And I thought of my daughter, I mean my child, and of my breasts which protrude in a superfluous fashion, and of my makeup, mask of an aging drag queen. And I felt ridiculously out of touch. A woman gets tired of impersonating a woman, like keeping the front porch clean for the drivers by. Why not write a book instead? Why not tattoo "fuck the gender cops" on your knuckles? I asked my child what should be done with my jewelry when I die. And they said, I still like jewelry. And something inside me as primitive as putting flowers on a grave felt gratified. I can die now, I thought. And all the ways I tried to make them conform to femininity, may they die with me. I'm sorry, darling, that I wrapped you up in all that soft pink fairy shit, that tool for your quinceañeras. Okay, and I see I've got a little more time. Let's see what I've got here. All right, this is another new poem called Don't Hurry, Don't Hurry. And it starts with an epigram from the poet Larry Levis. In the future, everyone, simply everyone, will be hung in effigy. 20 years ago, the 20th century ended and we're still not living on the moon. We're still sitting on the couch with the yellow legal pad wondering why we bother. When each of us deserves a parade down Main Street for our restlessness and our believing. When each of us contemplates the medieval death dance in which death plays a flute and is followed by a priest, a midwife, a child, a knight, all dancing joyously because death is a dance in a high school gym hung with purple and white streamers. Death, which is like sex because we fear it, because it obliterates us, even obliterating that rare virgin whose only previous obliteration occurred on a Ferris wheel once, high above a city of sparkling spires in a novel by Jose Saramago, who is almost too good a writer to be read. I'm trying to be readable here, can't you tell? I'm mentally walking a meditation labyrinth at the top of a cliff and trying not to look down while the oak trees around me cry, shedding hard little leaves. The leaves do not transcend themselves, nor do we. Okay, and Harry?
Thank you for that exhilarating reading. I mean, you enraptured us with your inner and exterior, the spiritual, the profane, and I don't know what more you can say. It was like time out of time. You know, you took us to the Himalayas, you took us to church, you took us to Topanga. You know, one thing I'd like to say about this experience I'm having, you know, I've known all the poets pictured, for many years, and I've known Jennifer since I've been here 3 years. But just being on the screen together is very intimate. I know it's a surface, but it's, when you're watching a reading, you have the audience looking at the reader. So we're looking at people's heads. But here, our faces are all together for this hour. And so it's relative, it is new, and it's certainly new for me. But we have 2 minutes left. I would just like the two poets just to take 1 minute each and just tell briefly, when did each of you write your first poem, starting with Gail, since she's on the big screen?
Oh, okay. I wrote my very first poem in second grade. And I'm just one of those people who always knew I wanted to be a poet. I wrote a poem about February becoming March that started off, March is marching right on through. Goodbye, February. Goodbye to you.
You got it right there. How about you, Sarah?
I don't know about the very first one, but the first one I can remember kind of cogitating over, I think I was somewhere between 10 and 11, maybe 12. I was at a lake at a camp. So it started, the lake is green, a beautiful green that nobody can deny. But it got more interesting because I was realizing that there were more colors in the lake. It wasn't just green or blue, it was also purple and brown. And so, but I felt like I really started to get into things with poetry more seriously when I was 13, after seeing Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet.
That was really important for me too, that movie. Yeah.
One thing, Gail, in the last few seconds, I always loved those lines in the Bhagavad Gita. I am not stained by my action. I do not yearn for its fruit. And so, thank you for bringing up India. And I think that's our wonderful show today. I don't think it could be any better than this was today. But thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.